Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it. Make your dreams come true.
Hello, and welcome to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about getting started with a new webcomic and the whole mindset that goes along with it. I'm Delphina. I use she, her pronouns, and I make the comic Sombulus.
Hello, I am Rennie. I use she, they pronouns, and I make the webcomic Kate Blast.
Hello, I'm Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and I make the comic Overlord of Ravenfell and On Empyrean High.
I'm Megan. I use she, her pronouns, and I make Sorcery Shenanigans and My Illustrated Life.
Awesome. Okay. So now, whether it's your first and only webcomic or one of many that you're planning, preparing to launch a new comic can take a lot of thought. You'll be thinking about the organizational aspects, which is getting your art and story plans ready, the technical aspects, which includes hosting that works for the scope of your comic, and the marketing, which is the basic outreach you need to get audiences to find the comic. We're going to say right now at the top of the episode that the marketing and technical aspects are big topics that folks ask about a lot. We've already got a lot of requests for those on Twitter and places, but the options we have for marketing webcomics and using a contact management system or a host, those are big beasts that evolve practically every other year. So we're going to go over some basics to get you started, what we're working with in our dear year of the Lord 2022 going into that. But look forward to more discussions about marketing and technical setup in later episodes because there will be a lot of stuff. But for now, let's dive in. So how do you even know that web comics are right for you? What are the pros and cons? I'm going to throw that to you, Rennie.
So I think there's a lot of different paths you can choose when you're looking into getting into comics. Um, I know for me personally, it was sort of there's a big path between the print traditional way of go out and get your original graphic novel, pitch it around, get an agent, all that path, and then there's zines and webcomics, which I kind of count in a sort of separate thing where it's very much a do-it-yourself mentality of, no, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to go out there and it's going to happen and no one's going to stand in my way. And that's basically where zines and webcomics sort of fall. And the final sort of thing, at least that I look at when looking at those two of between zines or webcomics is where you live, where you're located. Because, if I'm fortunate enough to live in the greater Boston area, which has a very robust comic scene, a very strong zine scene, so there's a good access to that community. But if you live somewhere, far away from sort of a major metro center or a metro center that doesn't really have a zine scene, doing that route might become very cost prohibitive. So webcomics is a very accessible way to sort of get your voice out there. And if that's sort of what you're looking for, that's why webcomics comics.
Web comics. Yes, I love the accessibility and just being able to do that no matter where you live. You could be in the middle of freaking nowhere and web comics will be there for you. I think that's so awesome. So, what about you, Ray? What do you think? Like, how do you know web comics are right for you?
Well, I think they're a very good medium for you to be able to grow and practice your skills. So there's that aspect of it. Is it's a good way to start making comics without going through the whole publishing thing, and also just the fact that it's its own special skill set that you best learn by doing. And it's because it's different from illustration, it's different from writing. Um, and another aspect of it, I think, is appealing to a lot of minority and LGBT, is there's not really editorial oversight. You don't really have the same kinds of gatekeepers that you would find in the publishing world, which is why you'd see pretty much so many comics that are made by authors from minorities and such. So I think that's also something that's very appealing. And just the fact that anyone can post it, and you just also have, like, potentially a worldwide audience as opposed to a zine scene, which is much more intimate.
Yeah, that's so true about like being able to put things out there when you're kind of being gate kept out of other spaces. I think a lot of webcomics sort of evolved from that because there's just so many groups and stuff that if you're not a white dude, that's like, what are you going to tell? There's only certain kind of stories that publishers will want to take on. So I love that for webcomics. I think that's awesome. I'm going to throw it to you, Meg. How do you know that webcomics are right for you?
I think for me, it's kind of two different ways. One way is just webcomics are very sort of beginner friendly because there's no real sort of gatekeeping. If you don't know what you're doing and this is your first time, you can just mess around. You can just put your first comic out there and nobody can really stop you if you're using your own, web platform that just accepts free comics or if you found your own website. The other one, for me at least, is that sometimes when you imagine stories you want to tell, it feels like there's a very huge visual component to the story. And that's how I kind of personally decided that I was going to get into comics, is that I just couldn't separate the idea of art being a huge factor in my stories.
I want to follow up on what you said there because I think it's totally spot on. Is that, I think with webcomics being, very much not much standing in the way between you and you posting your comic online, it is absolutely super beginner friendly. I know for myself, Kate Blast is my first comic and I wanted to do it to get experience. So absolutely going out there and like just going, okay, I'm going to just draw this and I'm going to learn, because the only way you can really learn comics is making comics. And webcomics is super friendly for that. And even on the long run, people enjoy seeing growth in comics too. So starting, just getting out there and starting, it's a great space for that.
Yeah, I do think the fact that there's no gatekeeping, you don't have to worry about whether it's even going to make money, which really allows for a lot of freedom and the types of genres that you wouldn't necessarily see in the
Mm-hmm.
mass marketing, publishing, and such. So a lot of webcomics are often very niche, and I think actually that that's probably one of their strengths.
I absolutely agree. I just love the fact that there's so much out there. There's so much, uh, like, just weird stuff. Like, you can find any kind of webcomic out there. But also just groups that, like, you never knew that there was another person out there like you. Like, maybe you are kind of geographically isolated and, like, it's a way to connect with other people. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it really just, because there's no gatekeeping, really allows the author of the comic to just make what they really want to make. It's just a way for you to get your story out there or to express yourself. And I think that really attracts people not only to make comics, but to read them, because as long as like you can tell that the author is having, a blast doing what they're doing, it really attracts you and interests you and makes you kind of want to watch them grow.
That energy is so attractive in comics, is just seeing the creator just having the time of their life.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's another thing too. Like, kind of mentioned, like maybe your stuff isn't appealing to a publisher, and you don't have to worry about that. But like, I think one of the things that you want to keep in mind, like, is that webcomics are not a great place to make money. If you're thinking like, oh, this is going to be my get rich quick comic, everybody's going to throw money at my feet. Like, maybe not just starting out. You can certainly work up to that, but like I think that's also another thing. Like if you're thinking about, do I want this to be a web comic? If the money component is very important to you, maybe revisit that.
Yeah, get ready to get rich quick on $6 every 2 years for the
Yeah. Oh
first bit.
my gosh.
Only six?
And that's like, we'll get into that more later too, but it's, that's just the norm. So that like if you go into stuff and start putting ads on your site and start seeing that ad revenue, don't be surprised if you start seeing like low numbers up front. Everybody sees those. It's not a statement on you or your work or the quality of your story. It's just how it is. It's a very slow race to even get, to money, if money is something that's
Yeah.
important to you.
And then all of it goes to hosting.
I'm sorry. We were making money.
Yeah.
I think I found like $1 in my couch once. Does that count? Like when I was sitting on there drawing with my Cintiq? No? Okay. That's where my web.
I have like 10 pennies in my wallet.
Wait, you guys get paid?
Oh no. So let's go on to the next question. How do you build the scaffolding behind a webcomic? What kind of things do you consider when you're organizing your comic? What do you want to have all ready to go before you launch? What are your most important things? So let's ask Rennie.
Yeah, so a lot of this is from me learning what not to do, because I definitely jumped in with I'm just going to do this live. I don't care. We're just going to start. And I went in with no scaffolding.
Oh no.
And I had to stop several times to build that scaffolding, when I was already 3 stories in the air. But what I found that works now that I've built that is, things that, if I were to start again today, I would first go in with most of your story at least outlined. Get as much of the idea as you can out there. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be final. Like write the outline in pencil so you can still erase things and change things. But at least have the entire thing sort of, bullet pointed out. And that'll help you say, okay, am I biting off more than I can chew? How can I make this more reasonable for something that I want to achieve? And then while you're doing this, be thinking about what goals do you want? Where do you want to see the comic? And, goal setting is a whole other skill on its own, but like try and set your initial goal as something reasonable, something that you can achieve without really people interfering or anything that relies on other people. So set something that's reasonable and achievable as your sort of your first goals. And then make sure you're thinking about, okay, what do you want to say with the comic? If you want to say anything at all, because it's perfectly valid to have, a comic that doesn't really say much. That's just, I'm here to have fun and make people laugh. But that still says something. So you want to keep that sort of ethos in mind as you're sort of crafting this. And once you have those things in place, at least from a writing and preparation for your mindset standpoint, that's sort of the things that I would want to build on. And I know Meg and Ray have also thoughts on sort of the other scaffolding for art as well.
Yeah, let's throw it to Ray. What do you want to have started before you launch your comic?
Okay, well, I guess it depends on your goals, but of course, the first one would probably be format. There's like right now, scrolling comics are big. There's also page format. There's also some odd ones that like are actually integrated with the website and can really only be read on the web. So you definitely want to think on like what you can do, your limitations in the medium, as well as the things that you could necessarily do that you couldn't do on paper. And then for buffer, I would probably say have a buffer to start because life will usually happen, especially when you're not used to maintaining a schedule. My personal thing, and I've launched 3 webcomics so
Oh my
far.
goodness.
4 if you count the reboot for one of them. I would personally have an entire chapter done before you even start posting. And that's mostly because I've seen so many webcomic artists that will get 5 pages in and just get burnt out. When you have a whole chapter done, you have a nice significant chunk of story that people can actually read, and you can know that you can actually get those pages done. And I would also say consider your goals on where you might want this to go in the future. Like, do you want to print it? Well, then it might be a good idea to not draw at 72 DPI and make everything 300 DPI if you're even have a tiny inkling on doing print.
I just had heart palpitations when you said draw at 72 DPI. Like, no, don't do
Yeah,
it.
do not, even if you're not planning on printing, it's usually a bad idea. But I have heard so many horror stories of artists that were like, oh, I wasn't going to print it. And then years later, they ended up wanting to.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely keep those in consideration. I would hopefully, unless it's like a very episodic story, I do suggest figuring out the ending and having a lot of the main story beats in mind, but also always leave room for a better idea to come along.
Yeah, that flexibility it's kind of hard to keep both things in mind at once, but like having just the general path that you're going to go to and is so important because exactly to your point, people can get 5 pages in. People can go into this it's like a honeymoon phase, I call it. Like just they have the initial idea like what if vampires were pirates, and they draw 5 pages of vampires being pirates, and then like that's all they got. That's all. I don't know what's going on after that, but that's all I got. So having that kind of structure and having a plan to move it forward at least to a satisfying chapter conclusion can really help keep you on track through that honeymoon period. I'm going to go ahead and ask Meg now, what kind of scaffolding do you have in place? Because you've done a couple comics too, like, so you must have a strategy. I'm very curious about this.
Well, I'm flattered you think I have a strategy, first of all.
Oh no.
That's amazing. I mean, Sorcerer Shenanigans, because it's more of a graphic novel kind of type comic, does have some sort of scaffolding. That one I had outlined kind of the whole thing, which is the very base thing I think anyone should start out with. You should have some kind of outline from beginning to end of how the story goes. You don't have to have it all detailed because, like Ray was saying, it's nice to leave yourself some flexibility in case you suddenly have some fantastic idea to change too. But it's good to know, at least vaguely, what the heck you're doing. And then I would definitely keep your schedule in mind. How often do you want to update? And then based on that, at least have either a month or 2 months worth of like a buffer in case life happens, because it will, and you will not be prepared. But I mean, my other comic, My Illustrated Life, has absolutely no scaffolding. There's no buffer because they're journal comics. So I do them every week. And they always have to be done every week. So maybe don't do a journal comic for your very first one. I wouldn't suggest, but that's just me.
That's interesting because I feel like a lot of people start with journal comics though.
Maybe they do. I mean, journal comics are hugely popular, not only just like from a reader perspective, but like I think from the artist perspective to like just draw, because it's rather easy to just take a situation that happens to you and draw it. But maybe not, especially if you have like a very busy full-time job, because it will take a lot of work.
Yeah, I think the good thing about journal comics, they're the primary purpose, at least from what I've seen and experimented with myself, is it's something to sort of get yourself out there. So like if that's something that you want to do, I don't see the problem, but also like go in with the expectation of, do you have extra scaffolding of, putting limits on yourself of, I'm not going to make a journal thing about every single thing that happens, or I'm not going to make one about every single day. Because I have seen people go into journal comics and be like, I have to have something interesting from every single day. And then that starts getting into their head. As far as, oh no, I have to make my life interesting
Oh
for the
no.
internet. No, you don't. So that's sort of at least the one thing that I've seen that has worked for people is, when they have those sort of limits on. I'm sure you have some of those too, Meg.
Yeah, I will say definitely you do not have to make something for every day. You do not have to make your life interesting. I do weekly updates, and I feel like that's a very good start for journal comics, especially if it's, like I said, if it's kind of secondary to like your full-time job or if you run another comic, just find one interesting or funny. Doesn't even have to be a happy thing. Sometimes you can get a little sad. Readers, the whole point of journal comics is to be able to like look at somebody else's life and kind of connect with you. So it doesn't have to be something happy and, positive 100% of the time. And as long as it's one thing, you've got yourself a good story. Sometimes it'll be short, but maybe that week a shorter update is really all you can get out.
Yeah, I think that's one of the beautiful things about short form versus long form, because I do myself tend to think in long form terms, like I need to have a chapter, I need to have an arc. But short form comics, which include like auto bio or journal or gag a day sorts of things, like you are kind of thinking more on the spot and more snappy. And so there's a little bit of a different approach to those. I think definitely to your point, having that like month or 2 months of buffer can help you so that when you're just having like a week where it's just like, nope, brain turned off, can't do this, too busy, like you'll have that to lean on and you can come back.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that is, when you're just trying to figure out exactly how long your buffer should be, you should definitely take the time to fully understand, one, your own personal schedule. If you have a day job, sort of the impacts that has, or like you don't want to sacrifice all your social life for a comic because that'll burn you out faster than anything else. So it's trying to figure out your own life and sort of what balance you can strike and what buffer you need to have up front so that you can limit that stress. I know the starting with a chapter, like Ray said, is a great idea. If you can do that, I recommend it. But I know some people's work schedules don't necessarily allow that. Or if they did, it would take them like several years to get that chapter. So it's definitely look at both your own schedule and sort of your own mental health and be like, what do I need to have a buffer for? Of, say, if you have a bad month and just need to stop for a bit. Build that in because, as everyone has said, life will happen whether you have a buffer or not. So be prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, like, a lot of these things kind of sound like rules, like you must have a month of buffer or blah, 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 blah. And we're definitely not trying to say that. We are saying, like, this is better for your mental health in our experience because,
Based on, yeah.
yeah, so do whatever you want to do to make sure that that energy keeps going. But, like, please take care of yourself.
Yeah, I just want to say that chapter before I even launch is from experience because my first comic, I was drawing the night before that it came out and I was updating 3 days a week.
Oh no.
Big mood.
So please love yourself.
those 11:55 p.m. mood of, all right, I can get these letters done in time.
Exactly.
That panic in your eyes.
We're all speaking from experience. We are saving you the pain and mental stress that we caused ourselves. Please listen to us.
Yeah, and I do want to say that if you need to take breaks or something like that, if you can't always hit your like Monday, Wednesday, Friday plan, or if you need to change course like a month in or something, seeing like, oh gosh, I cannot do 3 days a week. Like this is the time to do it. This is the time, like when you're first launching and you haven't really built a huge audience or expectations, like you have a lot of leeway here. And so, yeah, if take a month, do the schedule that you thought you were going to do, and then reassess and like keep going and find that one schedule that's like, yeah, this works with the different curveballs that I've been thrown so far.
Yes, I want to reiterate on that too, is unless you're doing something like Tapas or Webtoon Originals or like Hiveworks, where, the updates per week is more of a contractual obligation, absolutely mess with your schedule to your heart's content to whatever needs to happen. I know personally for me, I do 2 pages a week, but every now and then I know, okay, life happened and I need to skip one day and then I'm back on track. And I have that ability because I just, I'm not beholden to anyone as far as dictating my schedule. So for you as the creator, you have the power, barring very few situations, you have complete control over sort of how you're updating. So when you set your schedule, it's important to stick to it, but that's more of a guideline than a rule.
Yeah, I think it's to get you in the habit to train yourself to continue to do pages on a regular basis when you're first starting out. It's not like people are going to look at you and say, well, you updated Thursday instead of Wednesday. Tisk, tisk, tisk. No, nobody's doing that. Nobody's keeping track. And I think one thing too, if you have a RSS feed on your site, or if you're doing something through Tapas or Webtoons where they automatically tell subscribers that you've updated a page, that can kind of lessen the burden as well, because then people are just getting the updates as you do them. You do want to stay fairly regular still, so people know you're not like abandoning the project, but that can also help if like you need to scoot your updates back or forth a little bit in the beginning. Hi, this is Delphina to tell you about Ray's webcomic On Empyrean High. It's a brand new comic exploring the world of Empyrean that's full of sky pirates, dragons, and adventure. The art is gorgeous and the story is just starting, so hop in now. You can catch up on the archive at empyreancomic.com. EMPYREAN comic.com, all one word. Or follow Empyrean High on Twitter for updates. Check it out and enjoy the episode. So to that point, where do you post a webcomic? What are your options for that going into 2022? And please, again, with the knowledge that things are changing all the time, but like, what are your options right now to host a comic? Starting with Rennie.
Yeah, the one thing I really want to drive home is that given that the internet is changing constantly, the internet will probably have changed by the time this episode comes out. We don't know. But the one thing that has stayed relatively the same is no matter where you host, it's always really good to own your own website, whether it's on your own domain, your own server, or if it's using something like Comic Fury or one of those sort of hosts like that. But have your own space separate from a corporate place where, like, if you're hosting on Webtoons, have it somewhere else too, unless you're in like Webtoons Originals, which prevents that. But you're probably not going to be when you're just starting out. So it's okay to have sort of multiple different places where your comic is up. So that way, if one site, rest in peace, Smack Jeeves, we'll pour one out for you. If one site just goes poof out of nowhere, your comic is also not poof. At that, I want to pass it off to Ray, who sadly had that experience.
Okay, so Smack Jeeves, you could buy a domain and get rid of their branding, and no one would ever know that it was a Smack Jeeves site.
That was so nice.
You could have your own ads. It was pretty much almost like hosting, but without the finding a content management system and trying to get it to work.
Hosting with guardrails.
And then they just died and got rebranded. It took away all those cool features. So I am very firmly in the please self-host. But also, you can post your comic in as many places as you want. You could post it on Webtoons, Tapas, your own website, any other things in like the far reaches of the internet, Tumblr, DeviantArt. I've seen people post their comic on Reddit and Twitter as well. You can just post it everywhere. But you should try to drive whatever traffic you can to your actual hosted website, in my opinion.
Yeah, those are tools in my view. Like if you have a home base of your own comic, you can always kind of build up a little audience there, but pulling people in from various other places, depending on where you're comfortable, certainly don't overreach and like feel like you need to be everywhere at once. But like,
Oh, yeah, no.
yeah, try out different things, see what works, see what like how people are responding. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, do as much as you feel comfortable doing, and feel free to abandon those places if you feel that they aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah. So What about you, Meg? Where do you post your comics? Where would you recommend other people posting their comics? And what are the options out there? What do you think?
I mean, I post both of them on Webtoons. Sorcerer Shenanigans also has its own website on Comic Fury, one of those wonderful free hosting platforms. The scroll format, as Ray said earlier, is very popular these days, and that's right now at least very big on like Webtoons and Tapas. It is sort of a different beast than the regular page format, trying to set that up. But if you're just getting started, don't worry about it too much. Just put your comic out there, get used to it. If you want, obviously, you probably read some comics on, maybe Webtoons or Tapas yourself. You can use those as reference, see how they do their scroll comics, see if you want to set up like that. But those are pretty easy ways to just kind of get your foot in the door. Free alternatives to, paying for your own hosting or your own domain and whatnot. But that's generally where I post my stuff.
I think the other good thing with a lot of the scroll sites is that there are at least two big ones and one up and coming. With we have Webtoons and Tapas, and then Dilly Hub is starting to get out there, which is great. I'm a personal fan of sort of their platform at this point in time.
What is Dilly Hub? I've seen it a little bit around, but what is it?
They are basically the best of sort of Webtoons and Tapas with the scroll abilities, but have some integration where you can do fundraising, and you can also have like scroll or page, and it sort of changes.
I've tried it out and it's actually like really nice. It's kind of like if you took a lot of Patreon's features and actually made it for comics. And it does use the coins, like a coin system, like Tapas and such have their own like pay ahead to see these things, but you can actually customize them quite a bit. So I'm pretty much a fan, because as much as Patreon is good for artists, it's not really formatted for comics.
Yeah. Ooh. So it's like more if you're interested in monetizing, would you say that's a good option, or it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing to keep in mind is also, if getting numbers for viewers is important, that's something to keep in mind. And when you're trying to choose one, because Webtoons obviously has the biggest audience, followed by Tapas, then with Dilly Hub somewhere behind. Personally, and I'm of the opinion where if you have the ability to post on all three, to have as many mirrors as you can, go for it. You can still pick one to sort of be your primary if you want to, but don't feel any kind of brand loyalty either. Unless they are paying you, you owe them nothing.
Yeah. Absolutely. You are the one making the thing that people are coming for. Without creators like us, they have nothing. So, yeah, don't feel like you have to like do everything they say. I know a lot of platforms will come up with weird rules or restrictions, or things that you may not like, and yeah, it's just always nice to have a place where you make the rules, you make the call about like what kind of content you want to have on your site, and then if you don't like whatever platform, they're not your only option. I think that's important too. So you put your comic out there, you've launched your comic. How do you let people know your comic exists once you've launched? What can you do marketing wise? Is there anything you want to avoid or keep in mind, like getting the word out there?
I think the one thing I will start with saying is that when you launch, even whether it's your first time or your 30th time, the first chapter of your comic, marketing should probably not necessarily be at the forefront of your priorities. It's important to sort of get the word out that, hey, I've launched, but the metrics matter a lot less until you sort of reach a certain threshold. Because I think it's very difficult to sort of glean anything from metric numbers when you only have like 4 or 5 pages. So people aren't really going to stick around too long. And that's, again, not an indictment on your work or your skill. That's just, there's 4 or 5 pages. So go in with a mindset that sort of deprioritizes numbers and analytics for the first chapter or so, and use that energy to sort of focus on your work. Now, it's important, like I said, it's important to sort of get get the word out there. So definitely use Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr to your heart's content. Scream from the top of that mountain as loud as you can, as often as you want, because you've made the thing, you've earned it. Scream about it. The other place that I've recently started using that I wish I had started sooner was make a little banner for Top Webcomics, because Top Webcomics has sort of different categories that a lot of readers like to go to. And whether you're at the top of the list or the bottom of the list, there are dedicated readers that will scroll through and find your comic just based on genre and the banner. So that is definitely a great place if you have your own site to try and sort of grab readers.
Do you need to have your own site for Top Webcomics? Can you point them to it?
I don't think so.
No, you don't.
Yeah, you could point into a Tapas or a Webtoon Hub or whatever you got. But yeah, topwebcomics.com,
Yeah.
they've been around for ages. And yeah, it's just kind of like you send your readers there, they can vote for your comic, and they compile like a list of the top 100, 200, like it keeps going on. Like it's basically a popularity contest. But Rennie's absolutely right that like you can still get traffic from there, even if you're not like the super popular comic. And so it's a good little place. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can also put up like little sketches as incentives and things. So I like it a lot too. So Ray, we'll throw it to you. How do you let people know that your comic exists once you've launched, and what can you do marketing wise, and what do you not want to do marketing wise?
See, I feel like a lot of people rely on tags and stuff, especially on, say, Twitter or Tumblr, but the problem with that is it tends to be really, really saturated with creators, but not so much readers. So you need to pretty much find where the readers are going. Top webcomics is probably one of them. I do hear some people say that they had some success in Reddit and stuff,
Oh,
but
nice.
I do a bit more unorthodox things. Like, for instance, my first comic was super anime and edgy, so I actually went way back in the day. I posted on Gaia with it in my signature, and I actually got a lot of response from that. Yeah. And another one is actually TV tropes. They actually prefer if you make your own page, if you have like a really small thing like webcomics or a web novel or such, and you can add tropes, and a lot of people will search for things to read specifically by certain tropes. So it's actually a really good way for people to get like really down and nitty gritty into what they like. And if you have an extremely niche comic, it's actually really good.
Really?
Oh, I didn't know that.
And another one, which I feel like a lot of people overlook because I don't think that they always did this, is Goodreads. Goodreads, there is actually a section for webtoons and webcomics, and you have to have the first season or chapter of your comic done before you add it, and you can only list the first season and volume or whatever, and people
Yeah.
can rate and score it. So that's also a really good way to get readers to have eyes on your books, although then you'll have to deal with rating systems, and you might not want to look at it necessarily because of that. But those are definitely some options. I won't get too nitty gritty into the other places, but I do recommend Top Web Comics, TV Tropes, and
Yeah,
Goodreads.
thank you so much, because I have a TV tropes and I always forget about it. I'm just like
Oh, same.
it's there, but like it does help. And to your point, people are looking for really specific things. And we make really specific things. We make really niche
Oh,
things. Yeah.
another thing that, oh, I'm sorry, Luma, webcomic library.
The webcomic library is such a fantastic resource.
Its webcomic library also lets you get really nitty gritty into the genres, as well as has some really nice tagging system, especially for LGBT stuff. So I definitely would recommend getting on that. if you like when you can.
Does it have a site, or is it just a Discord, or how do people get to Webcomic Library?
It's on Tag Packer.
We will post a link to that in the description below.
Oh, totally.
Sounds like a good idea, yeah. But I've heard so many good things about Webcomic Library, and I think my site's on there. I think it got listed somehow or another, and just like being able to like use that tag system, I love it when people have that kind of accessibility. It's so nice. I'm gonna throw it to Meg. How do you let people know your webcomic exists once you've launched, and like what kind of things can you do?
I'm not really sure I am a fantastic shining example of this, but I will say the most I do, I think I really just more rely on word of mouth. I just post it on my Twitter, my Instagram. Oh, there's a new update. Friends, whether real or other webcomic creators, will kind of share it around. But I mean, really, my method is just throwing it into the void and see if
The void.
somebody leaves the void and looks
The
at it.
void. I like the void as a better descriptor.
I just yeet my art into the void.
We call that word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth. No, I like yeeting my art into the void and seeing if somebody says something.
Well, when you're just starting out, I don't feel like you necessarily need to have like a 5-year marketing campaign or,
Oh no, definitely not.
yeah, I think that's a lot less stress. So if you've got a lot of other things going on in life, that's completely cool to just like put it on Twitter, see what happens.
Yeah, and especially, when you're planning for marketing or anything like that, we're going to have a whole other marketing episode coming up sometime in the next month or two. But definitely keep in mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that things take a while to sort of ramp up. Think of it as, starting a mile-long freight train. It's going to take a lot of work and time to get that train moving. And it's, once you get to that point where the train is moving and fully moving at top speed, that's when really sort of a lot of marketing and getting the word out there really will actually start showing a lot of, sort of analytics back that, are actually meaningful. So absolutely do not sweat marketing stuff. And, if you just want to just throw it in the void, that's absolutely valid too.
And I think you mentioned it earlier in the episode too, just like kind of celebrating the things that don't rely on external validation, because that's like you can't control how many followers you have. You can't necessarily control like how many likes you get or comments that you get, but you can control just getting to the next chapter. And like that is so important when you're first starting out. It's so tricky to get that momentum going, and like the fact that you're doing it is amazing.
1,000% yes.
We're bringing something from nothing and giving readers something really cool.
Comics are cool.
Comics are cool.
I love comics. Yeah. To your point, it's a marathon, it's not a race. And the marketing aspect especially, that never ends. Like I'm like 11 years into this comic of mine, and like I'm still trying to get new readers to take a look at it, because you'll always have another page, you'll always have another opportunity, and people will kind of read something for a little bit and then maybe like put it down for a couple years and maybe come back. So just because you don't have everybody at the very launch of your comic is perfectly fine, because there will always be another way to get them.
Yeah, I am of the opinion that launches are very important from a personal standpoint. Of it is a personal accomplishment that you should absolutely celebrate the heck out of for getting your thing out there. But launches are not very important for marketing unless it's like a Kickstarter campaign. So prioritize the celebration of it rather than the numbers.
Absolutely. Now I want to make a new comic. Like I'm just like the exciting part of like getting a new comic launched, but I think I'll stick with this one. Does anybody else have anything else, or should we call it a wrap?
Call it a chicken Caesar salad wrap.
I can't call it a chicken Caesar salad wrap. I'm not crispy. Can we call it a Thai crunch wrap? Maybe that's my flavor.
That's your sign off, is the Thai crunch wrap.
Okay. I think we've got a Thai crunch wrap right here. So I have been your host, Delphina, and you can find my comic Somnolus at somnolus.com.
I've been Rennie. You can find my comic over at keithblast.com.
And I'm Ray. You can find my comic at EmpyreanComic.com, or Overlord of Ravenfell is on Webtoons.
And I'm Megan, and you can find either of my comics, Sorcery Shenanigans or My Illustrated Life, on Webtoons, and you can find Sorcery Shenanigans on Comic Fury as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.
Boy!
Yay!
Don't even get me started. Thank you so much for listening to Screen Tones. Please subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to also follow us on Twitter at ScreenTonesCast.